I want you to imagine you could design the perfect week. You get to pick who you talk to, what problems land on your desk, which conversations you sit in, and which ones you skip. You've earned that. You've put in the years of building, years of grinding, years of making decisions when nobody else would. And now you have enough leverage and enough reputation to shape your days exactly the way you want them. Think about that. Here's what I want you to consider. What if that ability, the ability to control your environment, is the very thing that's quietly costing you the most right now? Not because you made bad choices, not because you're in a bad room, but because success gave you the tools to remove the friction that used to force your sharpest thinking. And over time, without even noticing, you use those tools. Today, I'm going to walk you through something I don't hear anyone talking about. And it's the thing I think experienced operators need to hear the most. We're going to look at how the very success you've built creates an invisible insulation layer between you and the kind of discomfort that actually produces your best work. Not the discomfort of crisis. You can handle that. The discomfort of being exposed, being wrong in real time, and being around people who don't manage your feelings before they tell you what they see. By the end of this, you're going to recognize this pattern in your own life. And more importantly, you're going to understand why recognizing it is the first step to reversing it. Welcome to Business, Bourbon, and Cigars. I'm Scott Joseph. I have spent 30 plus years, building and scaling companies, acquired multiple dealerships, and eventually built Me Plus Ultra, a mastermind community designed for operators who have reached a level where the usual advice stopped being useful a long time ago. I've sat across from leaders running 9-figure organizations, and I've sat with founders who just crossed their first million. And in both cases, the thing that separates the ones who keep evolving from the ones who quietly plateau is not intelligence, strategy, and effort. It's whether their environment still has permission to make them uncomfortable. I know this because I lived the opposite for longer than I should have. And what I'm about to share with you comes directly from that experience. Here's what we're going to cover. First, I'm going to tell you about a moment on my own podcast that exposed something that I didn't want to see about myself. Then we're going to unpack what I call the insulation problem. The 3 specific ways that operators build buffers around themselves without realizing it. And then finally, I'm going to give you a way to test whether this is happening in your world right now. Because the tricky part about insulation is that it feels like competence. It feels like maturity. It feels like you've earned the right to operate this way. And you have, except it's eroding the one thing that got you here. A while back, I was recording an episode with a guest. The conversation was going well. The energy was good, and we had a strong back and forth. You know, the kind of episode where you can feel it clicking as it happens. And at one point, my guest answered a question and then tossed something back to me. It was a great question. The kind of question that, if I had caught it in the moment, could have opened the conversation into territory neither of us had planned for. I missed it entirely. It's very uncomfortable when I look back on it and think about the awkwardness of that moment. Not because I was paying attention in the usual sense, or not paying attention, I should say. I was locked in, but I was locked in on the wrong thing. I was so focused on what I was going to say next because I wanted to make sure I sounded prepared, on keeping that conversation tight, on making sure the episode landed, that the actual substance of what was being said to me didn't register. So I fumbled through a response, hoped it didn't sound as awkward as it felt, and then I kind of just moved on. Later, I'm listening back, and I heard the question clearly, and it stopped me because it wasn't just a good question. It was exactly the kind of thing my audience needed to hear me wrestle with in real time, the unscripted version, the version where I don't have an answer ready. That moment really stayed with me because it wasn't really about the podcast. It was about what I had been doing across the board. I'd gotten so practiced at performing competence that I had stopped being genuinely available to the moments that require something different. The moments that need you to be caught off guard, where the value isn't what you already know. It's really what you're willing to admit that you haven't figured out yet. After that, I made a decision. If I was going to do this, the podcast, the mastermind, any of it, I needed to actually show up, not the polished version, not the one I thought people wanted, the real one, my authentic self, the one who's curious, who cares about people, who wants to understand how things work rather than demonstrate that he already does. The moment I let go of performing, the podcast changed. The conversations got a lot deeper. The guest opened up differently. And the feedback shifted from great episode to, that one made me rethink something. That's a different category entirely. And it only happened because I stopped insulating myself from the discomfort of not having a ready answer. So let's talk about what's actually happening here. Because that podcast moment was a symptom of something a lot bigger. Something I've, since watched play out in dozens of operations at every revenue level. When you're early in your career, the environment controls you. You don't get to pick your problems. You don't get to choose who challenges you. Friction finds you whether you want it or not. Your landlord, your first difficult client, the employee who quits at the worst possible time. All of it forces you to adapt in real time with no buffer, no PR layer, no assistant filtering what gets to your desk. That pressure's brutal. But it also sharpens you. The decisions you're proudest of probably came from periods where you had no choice but to face something directly. Now fast forward 10, 15, 20 years. You've won. The revenue's there. Your team is cranking on all cylinders. Your reputation precedes you, and something shifts that nobody warns you about. You now have the ability to shape your own environment. You can choose which meetings to take. You can decide who gets access. You can build a team that handles the friction before it reaches you. You can join rooms where people already respect what you've built. None of that's wrong. Most of it's smart. The problem is that it compounds. And over time, without a single conscious decision to do so, you end up operating inside a world that has been optimized by you, all in an effort to minimize the exact kind of pressure that used to produce your sharpest thinking. Success doesn't make you soft. It makes you insulated. And insulation feels exactly like wisdom until you realize nothing has challenged your assumption in 2 years. I see this show up in 3 specific ways. Not as a list of tips, as a pattern that builds on itself. The first layer, you stop hearing what you need to hear. This one's subtle because it doesn't start with anyone necessarily lying to you. It starts with the people around you calibrating to you. Your team learns what kind of feedback you respond well to and what kind gets deflected. Your peers learn which topics are safe to push on and which ones trigger a defensive posture. Your advisors learn that certain recommendations get considered and others don't. So they stop making the ones that won't. Nobody decided to stop being honest with you. They just got efficient about it. And over time, the information reaching you has been pre-filtered through a lens of what you're likely to accept. The data is accurate. Dashboards are all real. But the interpretation, the part that requires someone to say something uncomfortable, that's kind of been sanded down before it ever gets to you. I've watched this happen inside my own company. At J&L Marketing, I had a strong team, strong people around me, people I trusted. But because I was the founder, because I had built the thing from nothing, there was this unspoken weight to disagreeing with me. Not because I punished it, at least I didn't think I did, but because the dynamic itself made it easier for people to adapt their feedback than to deliver it raw. The result was that I kept hearing versions of reality that confirmed what I already believed. And I mistook that confirmation for evidence that my instincts were still sharp. The second layer, you start performing instead of participating. And this is the one that hit me during the podcast recording. When you've been the person who's supposed to have the answers for long enough, it rewires how you show up. You walk into conversations ready to deliver rather than ready to discover. You start to join rooms prepared to contribute rather than prepared to be changed. The difference between those two things is enormous, and it's invisible to the person doing it. I caught myself doing this at industry events, conferences, even dinners with people I respect. I'd walk in with a version of myself already prepared, talking points ready, right? Stories I knew would land. I'd regurgitate responses I'd given 100 times before. And the conversations, they'd go well. People would nod, they'd laugh on all the right places, right? They'd tell me it was great to connect, but I'd leave without a single new thought in my head because I wasn't there to think. I was there to perform. The room didn't make me do that. I did it to myself. When you reach a certain level, every room you enter already has a version of you in mind. They know your story. They know your track record. And that reputation becomes kind of a shield. You stop getting the experience of being unknown. You stop having to earn credibility in real time. You stop sitting with the tension of not knowing whether, what you're about to say is going to land. And that tension, that exact discomfort is where the most honest version of your thinking lives. The third layer, you confuse earned respect with earned certainty. This is the one that does the most damage and takes the longest for you to see. When you've been right about enough things for long enough, the line between I've earned the right to trust my instincts and I've stopped questioning whether my instincts still apply, that disappears. And the environment you've built reinforces that disappearance daily. Give you examples. Your team agrees. The numbers seem to cooperate at least enough. The peers in your circle nod. And you start making decisions from a place that feels like confidence, but it's actually memory. You're running a playbook that was written under conditions that may not exist anymore. Not because you're arrogant, because your environment, the environment you've created, gives you no reason to question it. The operators that I respect the most, the ones inside Me Plus Ultra, the ones I've watched navigate this specific trap, have figured out something that most successful people resist. They've learned to deliberately reintroduce friction into their lives. Not the chaos of the early years. Not manufactured pressure for the sake of it. Structured discomfort. Rooms where their reputation doesn't precede them. Conversations where the question on the table isn't, what's your advice? But what are you avoiding? It's a better question. Environments designed specifically to bypass the insulation layer they've spent years building. The most dangerous version of comfort isn't laziness. It's competence without confrontation. If this episode is hitting home, you're probably already asking where this kind of thinking actually happens. That is exactly what Me Plus Ultra sessions are built for. They're small, virtual, structured working sessions for experienced business leaders and leaders. Each month includes breakthrough sessions, process sessions, and expert forums. And each one has a very specific purpose. In a session, one leader brings a real challenge or decision they're facing. The room starts by slowing the thinking down, asking clarifying questions, challenging assumptions, and making sure everyone is actually solving the right problem. From there, members are sharing insights, their experiences, and they're giving advice, but it's grounded, relevant, and it's built on what's actually already been pressure tested. If you've been in rooms where advice comes fast, but clarity never sticks, this is a different standard. You can request access right now at meplusultra.com/sessions. Once again, go to meplusultra.com/sessions. So here's how you test whether this is happening in your world. Ask yourself 3 questions, and you need to be brutally honest, ruthless about the answers. First, when was the last time someone who reports to you, works with you, or advises you told you something that genuinely caught you off guard? Not a market data point, not something your competitor is doing, something about your own thinking, your own blind spot, your own assumption that they named directly. If that hasn't happened in 6 months, it's not because you don't have blind spots. We all have them. It's because the environment has stopped surfacing them. Second question, in the last 3 rooms you sat in, whether it was a meeting, a mastermind, a dinner, maybe a conference, were you there to be heard or were you there to be changed? Both are valid, but if the answer is consistently to be heard, you're performing. And performing is the opposite of growing. Third, what decision have you been sitting on for more than 90 days. Not because you lack information, but because making it would require you to admit something you haven't said out loud yet. That's the decision your insulation is protecting you from. And it's almost certainly the one that matters most. I want to bring this back to something personal for a second. After that podcast moment, the one where I realized I'd been showing up to perform instead of showing up to be present, I started looking at every room in my life through that lens. And what I found, it was uncomfortable. Most of the environments I had built were good environments. Strong people, real conversations, genuine respect. But they had all, in different ways, adapted to me. And I had let them. The shift wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a breakdown or a revelation on a mountaintop. It was quieter than that. So I started deliberately putting myself in positions where I didn't have the answer, where my track record didn't buy me credibility, where the only currency that mattered was the quality of the question I was willing to ask. The leaders who keep sharpening after they've already won aren't the ones with better habits. They're the ones who refuse to let their environment stop demanding something from them. If what I said today hits something, if you're sitting with one of those 3 questions and the answer isn't what you wanted it to be, then you already know what the next step looks like. It's not more information. It's not another book or podcast. It's putting yourself in a room where the insulation gets stripped away, where people don't know your story well enough to manage around it, where the conversation forces you to engage in what's actually in front of you instead of what you've rehearsed. If this episode is hitting, you're probably already asking where this kind of thinking actually happens. That's what Me Plus Ultra sessions are built for. They're small, virtual, structured working sessions for experienced business owners and leaders. Each month includes breakthrough sessions, process sessions, and expert forums, and each one has a very specific purpose. In a session, one leader brings a real challenge or a decision they're facing. The room starts by slowing the thinking down, asking clarifying questions, challenging assumptions, and making sure everyone is actually solving the right problem. Nothing worse than great solutions to the wrong problem. We're not giving advice first. We're getting to what's actually underneath it. That's where the insulation breaks. In 1 hour, you feel the difference between a room that manages around you and a room that refuses to. From there, members share insights, experience, advice, but it's grounded, it's relevant, and it's built on what's already been pressure tested. If you've been in rooms where advice comes fast but clarity doesn't stick, this is a different standard. You can request access right now. Go to meplusultra.com/sessions. Don't wait. I'm Scott Joseph. This is Business Bourbon and Cigars. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers, everyone.